Elena Morales sat by the window of the long-distance bus, watching the endless line of dry fields pass by. The Texas sun was sharp, turning the sky a hard blue and the earth a faded gold. Every few minutes the bus rattled over a bump, and her small suitcase moved slightly from where it rested beside her feet. Inside that suitcase were all the things she owned: 2 simple dresses, a pair of shoes, a few letters from her mother, and the printed email that had given her hope for a better life. That email had come like a miracle 2 weeks earlier. It was from Mrs. Henderson, the owner of a large cattle ranch near Amarillo. The message had been short but kind. "We are looking for a responsible maid for household duties. Your experience is suitable. Please report to Henderson Ranch on October 4th. Elena had read it again and again, her heart swelling with relief. For months, she had searched for work after losing her job cleaning hotel rooms in El Paso. Her mother's health was failing, and the medicine cost more each week. Elena had promised herself she wouldn't give up no matter how many doors closed. This new job sounded honest and peaceful, working on a ranch, away from city noise and worries. When the bus finally stopped at the small station near the ranch, Elena stepped out into the bright afternoon heat. The air smelled of dust and dry grass. She fixed her hat, wiped the sweat from her forehead, and started walking down the long dirt road. Her boots kicked up little clouds with every step. She could see the Henderson Ranch in the distance, a wide house with white fences and a row of stables behind it. Horses grazed lazily near the fence, and she could hear the faint hum of windmills turning. For the first time in months, she smiled. She whispered softly, "This is it, my new start." At the gate, she saw a woman standing, Mrs. Henderson, dressed neatly in light-colored clothes and dark sunglasses. Next to her was a tall man, probably her husband, talking on the phone. Elena walked closer, holding out her papers with both hands. "Good afternoon, ma'am," she said politely, her voice nervous but hopeful. "I'm Elena Morales. I was hired by email to help with the housework." Mrs. Henderson took the papers and looked at them briefly. Then she raised her eyes to look at Elena. The woman's face stayed calm, but there was a small change in her expression, something like hesitation. She glanced at her husband, then at Elena again, her eyes moving up and down, taking in her appearance. Elena was tall, nearly 6 feet, with long arms and a strong build from years of physical work. Her dark hair was tied neatly in a braid, and her plain dress was clean but faded. She stood straight, waiting for an answer. Mrs. Henderson cleared her throat softly. "Yes, we did send an email," she said in a polite but uncertain tone. "You came from quite far, didn't you?" "Yes, ma'am," Elena replied, smiling. "I came from El Paso. I can start right away if you like." The woman adjusted her sunglasses and looked at her husband again. He shrugged, still on his phone. She turned back to Elena and said, "Would you mind waiting a moment, dear?" Then she stepped aside and whispered something to her husband. Elena waited by the gate, clutching the handle of her suitcase. The wind picked up, making the dry grass sway. She couldn't hear every word they said, but she caught a few. "Too tall, doesn't fit, and not the image." Her heart began to sink. She tried not to show her worry, forcing herself to smile when Mrs. Henderson returned. "I'm terribly sorry," Mrs. Henderson said with a tight smile. "There's been a misunderstanding. We actually found someone else for the position just this morning. I'm so sorry for the trouble." Elena blinked, her smile fading. "But ma'am," she said softly, "you sent me the message yourself. I came all the way here." Mrs. Henderson looked uncomfortable. Yes, I understand. It's unfortunate timing, that's all. I'll keep your name on file in case something opens up." It was clear the conversation was over. The woman gave her a polite nod and turned back toward the house. Elena stood still for a moment, trying to hold her tears. She wanted to say something, to ask if her height or her looks had offended them, but she swallowed the words. She wasn't the kind of person who begged for kindness. She had learned to walk away quietly when the world turned cold. She lifted her suitcase again and began walking back down the dirt road. The sun was lower now, painting everything in shades of orange and gold. She walked slowly, trying to understand what had just happened. Each step felt heavier than the last. When she reached a small open field near the stables, she stopped to catch her breath. She could hear the sound of horses nearby and the soft creak of wooden fences. Then from behind one of the stalls a man appeared. He was tall, lean, with a sunburned face and kind eyes under a wide hat. He wore dusty jeans and a faded plaid shirt. His hands were rough and strong, the kind that came from years of real work. He looked at her suitcase, then at her face. "You leaving already, ma'am?" he asked in a slow, gentle voice. Elena hesitated. "I suppose so." "They don't need me anymore," the man frowned. "Did they say that?" She nodded quietly. "Yes, they said there was a misunderstanding." He seemed to understand without her needing to explain further. He walked closer, stopping a few steps away, not wanting to make her uncomfortable. "You came all the way here, huh?" "Yes," she said softly. "I thought I had a job, but I guess I was wrong." The man rubbed the back of his neck. "That's rough. I'm Jake. I work around here. Do you have a place to stay tonight?" Elena shook her head. "Not really. I was hoping to find a room in town, maybe. I'll manage." Jake looked toward the ranch house, then back at her. He could tell she was trying hard to stay strong. There was something honest about her, something that didn't belong in the way she'd just been treated. "Well," he said kindly, "there's a small diner down by the main road. You can get a meal there, and I can tell you where to find a decent room for the night. It's not much, but folks there are friendly." Elena smiled faintly. "Thank you, Mr. Jake, just Jake," he said with a grin. "You look like you've been through enough formality for one day." For the first time since she stepped off the bus, Elena laughed softly. It felt good to laugh again, even for a second. They walked together toward the old wooden fence. Jake opened the gate for her and said, "Sometimes life has a funny way of closing doors so you find the right one later. Don't lose heart." Elena nodded, gripping her suitcase tighter. "I'll try not to." As she started down the road again, the sun dipped lower, spreading long shadows across the land. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but somewhere deep inside, a small spark of hope still burned. Maybe it was the kind voice of that cowboy, or maybe it was something bigger, something telling her that her story wasn't over yet. Behind her, Jake watched her walk away until she disappeared down the road. He didn't know why her leaving bothered him so much, but the image of her walking alone stayed with him long after the dust settled. And though Elena didn't know it then, that quiet encounter by the fence would be the beginning of something that would change both of their lives. The evening breeze was soft as Elena walked down the long road, her suitcase bumping lightly against her leg. The sky was slowly turning purple and the sun had dipped behind the low hills. She kept thinking about Jake's words, "Don't lose heart." She reached the small diner he had told her about. It was a simple place with a red roof, an old sign that read Luna's Diner, and a few trucks parked outside. When she walked in, the warm smell of coffee and pie filled the air. The woman behind the counter, probably Luna herself, looked up and smiled kindly. "Evening, sweetheart. You look like you've had a long day." Elena nodded shyly. "Yes, ma'am. Just looking for a warm meal and maybe a place to stay nearby?" "Well, you came to the right place," Luna said, pouring her a cup of coffee. "Eat first, then I'll tell you where you can get a clean room." Elena sat at the corner booth, sipping her coffee slowly. The warmth of it spread through her, calming her nerves. For a few minutes, she forgot about the rejection and just listened to the old country song playing softly from the radio. As she ate, the door opened, and Jake walked in. He nodded politely to Luna, then saw Elena sitting alone. He smiled and walked over. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. She shook her head, smiling back. "Please. Thank you again for helping me earlier." Jake sat down across from her. "No trouble at all. I was just checking if you made it here fine." "I did." "The food's good?" she said, taking another bite of pie. "Luna makes the best in the county," he said with a grin. Then his voice softened. "So what's your plan now? You still looking for work?" Elena sighed, her eyes lowering to the cup. "Yes, but I don't know where to start. I used almost all my money to get here. I can't go back to El Paso right now." Jake leaned back, thinking for a moment. "Well, I can't promise much, but I could use an extra hand at my place. It's just a small section of the ranch, but there's always work. Feeding the horses, cleaning the barn, helping with the garden. It's honest work." Elena's eyes widened slightly. "You'd really let me help?" He nodded. "Sure, I could use someone reliable. And you seem like you don't quit easy." Elena smiled for the first time that day. A real smile, warm and thankful. "I promise I'll work hard. You won't regret it." "I already know that," Jake said kindly. The next morning, Jake met her outside the diner with his old blue truck. It rattled a little, but it got them back to the ranch safely. He showed her around his small cabin, a modest place with wooden walls, a porch, and a garden patch that needed care. "You can stay in the small room next to the barn," Jake said, pointing toward a tidy little space. "It's not fancy, but it's clean and has running water." Elena looked at him gratefully. "It's more than enough, Jake, thank you." He nodded, slightly embarrassed. "Don't mention it." From that day on, their days found a gentle rhythm. Elena woke early to help Jake feed the horses. She swept the barn floors, washed the buckets, and cooked simple meals. Jake taught her how to ride a horse properly and how to mend broken fences. She wasn't afraid of hard work, and soon even the other workers at the ranch began to notice how much she did. She laughed more often now. There were moments when Jake caught her humming while she worked, her braids swinging as she moved. It brought a lightness to the quiet ranch that he hadn't felt in years. One evening, after a long day of work, Jake sat on the porch cleaning his boots. Elena came out with 2 cups of coffee. She handed him one and sat down beside him. The sun was setting and the sky was painted in soft pink and orange shades. "It's beautiful here," she said softly. Jake nodded. "Yeah, but it gets mighty lonely sometimes." She looked at him. "You live here all alone?" He took a slow sip. "Pretty much. Used to have a family once, but things didn't work out. Guess life had other plans." Elena nodded, understanding. "I know what that feels like. Life doesn't always go the way we think. But maybe it still leads us where we need to be." Jake looked at her, a faint smile touching his lips. "Maybe you're right." They sat in silence for a while, just watching the sun disappear behind the hills. It was the kind of quiet that didn't need words. As weeks passed, Elena became a part of Jake's daily life. She organized the old tool shed, planted flowers by the porch, and even painted the barn door that had faded under the sun. Jake found himself waiting for her laughter, her stories about her mother, and her quiet strength that filled the empty spaces of his days. One morning, as they worked in the field repairing a fence, Jake said, "You know, when you first showed up at that gate, I thought you'd turn right around and leave. Most folks would have." Elena smiled, wiping the sweat from her forehead. "Maybe I would have, but something told me not to give up. Maybe it was your kind voice that stopped me." Jake laughed softly. "Well, I'm glad you didn't give up." So was she. One afternoon, a storm rolled in suddenly. The sky darkened and rain began to pour down in heavy sheets. The wind howled through the fields, bending the trees and rattling the windows. Jake ran to the barn to secure the horses, and Elena followed without hesitation. Together they worked quickly, closing doors, covering feed, and calming the frightened animals. By the time the storm passed, both were drenched but smiling. Elena's hair clung to her face and Jake handed her a towel. "Guess you weren't afraid of a little storm," he said with a grin. "I've faced worse," she said, laughing, "and I'm still here." That night, after the rain stopped, they sat on the porch again, wrapped in blankets. The air smelled fresh and clean. Jake looked up at the stars, then at her. "You know," he said quietly, "I don't think I've laughed this much in years." Elena smiled softly. "Then maybe this was where you were meant to be too." Their eyes met, and in that simple, wordless moment, they both understood. 2 lonely souls who had been strangers not long ago had somehow found comfort in each other's company. Time moved gently after that. Elena wrote to her mother often, telling her how she had found work and a kind friend who treated her with respect. Her mother's letters back were filled with joy and blessings. One evening, Jake handed her a small envelope. "It's your first month's pay," he said. "You earned every bit of it." Elena looked at the envelope, then at him. "Thank you, Jake, but I think I've earned something more valuable here." He tilted his head. "What's that?" "A reason to keep believing." Jake didn't say anything for a moment. He just smiled. A quiet, heartfelt smile that said more than words ever could. As the seasons changed, the ranch felt different. Flowers bloomed near the porch, the horses seemed calmer, and even Jake's once lonely cabin now echoed with laughter and life. Sometimes the Hendersons would drive by in their big car, and Mrs. Henderson would glance toward Jake's side of the ranch. She would see the tall maid she had turned away, now smiling and working beside the cowboy she once overlooked. Elena never held bitterness in her heart. She only felt grateful. Life had rejected her that morning, but fate had opened another door that same day, one she never expected. And Jake, the lonely cowboy who once lived only for work, now had something to look forward to each sunrise. A kind voice, a shared cup of coffee, and the quiet joy of knowing he was no longer alone. In that small corner of Texas, Two souls found not just work or friendship, but something deeper, peace, purpose, and the gentle warmth of belonging.